Buddhism. Buddhism is the only important foreign influence that has become part and parcel of Chinese life. The influence is so deep that we now speak of children's dolls, and sometimes the children themselves, as little Buddha vistas, Xiao Pusa, and the Empress Dowager herself was addressed as Old Buddha. The goddess of mercy and the smiling Buddha have become Chinese household words. Buddhism has affected our language, our food, our arts, our sculpture, and directly inspired the characteristic pagoda. It has stimulated our literature and our whole world of imagination. The little monkish figure, with his bald head and his gray robes, forms an intimate part of any panorama of society. In Buddhist temples, rather than those of Confucius, are the center of town and village life, where the elders gather to decide on village matters and annual celebrations. Its monks and nuns penetrate the privacies of Chinese households on all occasions of births, deaths, and weddings, as no other persons are allowed to do, and hardly a widow or virgin can be seduced, according to the Chinese novels, without the help of these religious figures. Buddhism, in short, means to the Chinese people what religion means to people in other countries, namely, something that comes to the rescue when human reason falters or fails. In modern China, Buddhist monks are more popular than Taoist monks, and for every Taoist temple, Quan, there are 10 Buddhist temples, Miao, to be found. As late as 1933-4, the Panchen Lama of Tibet sprinkled holy water over tens of thousands of people in Peiping and Nanjing, including high government personages like Tuan Shiju and Tai Chitao, and was royally entertained by central and local governments of Nanjing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Canton. As late as May 1934, Nola Kotahutu, another Tibetan Lama, as official guest of the Canton government, publicly declared his ability to protect people against poison gas by incantations, and actually was able to influence a certain general to change the position of his guns at this fort through his superior knowledge of astrology and necromancy. Their influence would not be so great if the Chinese could see a clear way to repel Japanese attacks by modern military science. The Chinese reason here falters, and therefore turns to religion. Since the Chinese army cannot help the Chinese, they are willing to be helped by Buddha. Buddhism has conquered China as a philosophy and as a religion. As a philosophy for the scholars, and as a religion for the common people. Whereas Confucianism has only a philosophy of moral conduct, Buddhism possesses a logical method, a metaphysics, and a theory of knowledge. Besides, it is fortunate in having a high tradition of scholarship in the translations of Buddhist classics, and the language of these translations, so succinct and often so distinguished by a beautiful lucidity of language and reasoning, cannot but attract scholars with a philosophical bias. Hence, Buddhism has always enjoyed a prestige among the Chinese scholars, which so far Christianity has failed to achieve. Buddhist influence has been so great as to transform Confucianism itself. Confucian scholarship since the Zhou dynasty was confined to textual emendations and philologic commentaries. The fashion for the study of Buddhism, believed to be introduced to China in the first Christian century, rose steadily throughout the Northern Wei and Qin dynasties, and produced a change of emphasis from textual commentaries to the inner philosophic meaning, Yili. In the Song dynasty, there arose, directly under its influence, a new Confucian school, or several schools, which called themselves Li Shui, or philosophy. The preoccupation was still with moral problems, but terms like Xing, nature, Li, reason, Ming, predestination, Xin, mind, Wu, matter, and Zhi, knowledge, were brought into the foreground. There was a reawakened interest in the Confucian I Ching, Book of Changes, which studies the mutations of human events. These Song Confucianists, one and all, especially the Chung brothers, have delved deep into Buddhism and came back to Confucianism with a newly won perspective. The realization of truth was spoken of as by Lu Choyuan as an awakening in the Buddhistic sense, following a long meditation. Buddhism did not convert these scholars, but it changed the tenor of Confucianism itself. Equally great was its influence over writers like Su Tongpo, who were in an armed camp against these scholars, but who played with Buddhism in their own light, dilettante way. Su Tongpo styled himself a Chusu, which means a Confucian scholar living in Buddhistic retirement without becoming a monk. A most peculiarly Chinese invention, which allowed a follower of Buddhism to live in married life and become a vegetarian for periods at leisure. One of Su's best friends was a learned monk, Puyin, and the difference between these two friends was only a difference of degree of conversion. This was the time when Buddhism prospered under imperial protection, with the government bureau for the translation of Buddhist classics, and counting at one time almost 500,000 monks and nuns. Since Su Tongpo's time, and largely due to his great literary influence, many a scholar of high standing has played with Buddhism and become a Chusu of Su's type, if not actually entered a monastery as a monk. In times of national disorder, as during the change of dynasties, a great number of scholars shaved their heads and took monastic orders, as much for personal protection as out of a feeling for the helpless chaos of the world. There is justification enough in a chaotic country for the popularity of a religion which declares the vanity of the world and offers refuge from the pains and vicissitudes of this earthly life. We have today an extant copy of the life of Lu Liqing by his daughter. Lu Liqing, at the end of the Ming Dynasty and the beginning of the Manchu Dynasty, disappeared from the world in his old age, and after long years of separation from his wife and children, once entered the city of Hangzhou to cure the sickness of his brother, but refused to see his own family living next door. What disillusionment a man must have perceived of the phenomena of this life to do such a thing. and yet it is not impossible to understand it after reading his daughter's life. The depth of disillusionment was equal only to the depth of his personal sufferings. Accused of having a hand in the publication of a work by another author, which was considered disrespectful to the new Manchu regime, this man, after bidding farewell to his ancestors in a sacrificial prayer, started out with his whole family to Peking, in chains and under guard, with the constant expectation that his wife and children and close relatives would be slaughtered wholesale. He had said in his prayer that if he came back alive, he would become a monk, and he did. In this sense, Buddhism was an unconscious gesture of man in his battle with life, a form of revenge somewhat similar in psychology to suicide, when life proved too cruelly superior. Many beautiful and talented girls at the end of the Ming Dynasty took the monastic vow through disappointment in love caused by those catastrophic changes, and the first emperor of the Manchu dynasty became a monk for the same reason. But apart from this negative protest against life, there is an aspect of Buddhism which has an evangelical influence on the common people and works for general kindness. The most vivid and direct influence it exercises over the people is through its doctrine of transmigration. Buddhism has not taught the Chinese to befriend the animals, but it has largely restrained the consumption of beef. The Chinese doctrine of the golden mean has encouraged the people in the consumption of pork as an inevitable evil, and on the plea that the pig is a less useful animal than the cow, except as food. But it has driven home to the Chinese consciousness the idea that butchery is inhuman and displeasing to the gods. During the flood in 1933, the Hankow local government forbade butchery for 3 days as an atonement toward the river god. And this practice is generally universal whenever there is a drought or famine. Vegetarianism can hardly be defended on biologic grounds, since man is born with natural carnivorous as well as herbivorous teeth, but it can be defended on humane grounds. Mencius was conscious of this cruelty, but being unwilling to forego meat entirely, he fought his way out by giving the formula that a gentleman kept away from the kitchen. The fact that one does not see what happens in the kitchen eases the Confucian conscience. This solution of the dietetic difficulty was typical of the doctrine of the golden mean. Many a Chinese grandmother, wishing to please Buddha and not willing to forego meat entirely, would apply the doctrine of the golden mean in a different fashion by turning vegetarian for a definite period, from a single day to 3 years. But on the whole, Buddhism forces the Chinese people to admit butchery as an inhuman act. This is but one consequence of the doctrine of transmigration, which works for general humaneness towards animals and one's fellow beings. For the consequent doctrine of retribution and the possible soul survival in the form of a sore-ridden beggar or a flea-ridden dog may be a more effective object lesson for good behavior than a hell of pointed knives learned by hearsay. Actually, the true Buddhist follower is a kinder person, more pacific, more patient, and more philanthropic than others. His philanthropy may not be ethically worth much, since every cent given and every cup of tea offered to the passing stranger is an investment in personal future happiness, and therefore essentially selfish. But what religion does not use the same bait? William James has wisely said that religion is the most colossal chapter in the history of human selfishness. Man, outside the sincere humanist, seems to need this selfish bait. Nevertheless, Buddhism has given rise to the great institution of well-to-do families providing big earthen jars of cold tea for passing wayfarers on hot summer days. It is, in common phraseology, a good thing, irrespective of motive. Many Chinese novels, like the tales of Boccaccio, have accused the monks and nuns of immorality. This is based on the universal human delight taken in exposing all forms of hypocrisy. It is natural and easy, therefore, to make Casanovas of Chinese monks, provided with witchcraft and secret aphrodisiacs. There are actually cases in certain parts of Zhejiang, for example, where a nunnery is a house of prostitution. But on the whole, the charge is unfair, and most monks are good, retiring, polite, and well-behaved people. And any Don Juan exploits are limited to transgressing individuals and are grossly exaggerated in novels for effect. From my personal observation, most monks are underfed, anemic, and incapable of such exploits. Besides, this misjudgment is due to the failure to see the connection between sex and religion in China. The monks have a greater chance to see beautifully dressed women than any other class of people in China. The practice of their religion, whether in private homes or in their temples, brings them in daily contact with women who are otherwise shut away from the public. Thanks to the Confucian seclusion of women, the only unimpeachable pretext for women to appear in public is to go to the temples and burn incense. On the 1st and 15th of every month, and on every festive occasion. The Buddhist temple is the rendezvous of all the local beauties, married or otherwise, dressed in their Sunday best. If any monk eats pork on the sly, he may also be expected to indulge in occasional irregularities. Add to this the fact that many monasteries are exceptionally well endowed, and many monks have plenty of money to spend, which is the cause of mischief in many cases that have come to light in recent years. In 1934, a nun actually had the audacity to sue a monk for infidelity in a Shanghai court. Anything may happen in China. I give here a refined example of the literary handling of the sexual problems of the monks. The poem is called A Young Nun's Worldly Desires, which is a favorite topic and has many versions. It is taken from a popular Chinese drama, The White Fur Coat, and in Chinese is incidentally first-class poetry in the form of the young nun's soliloquy. A young nun I am, 16 years of age, my head is shaven in my young maidenhood. For my father, he loves the Buddhist sutras, and my mother, she loves the Buddhist priests. Morning and night, I burn incense and I pray, for I was born a sickly child, full of ills. So they decided to send me here, into this monastery. Amitabha, Amitabha, unceasingly I pray. Oh, tired am I of the humming of the drums and the tinkling of the bells. Tired am I of the droning of the prayers and the crooning of the priors, the chatter and the clatter of unintelligible charms, the clamor and the clangor of interminable chants, the mumbling and the murmuring of monotonous psalms. Pranaparamita, Mayura Sutra, Sadhara Mapundarika. Oh, how I hate them all. While I say Mitapa, I sigh for my view. While I chant Sapara, My heart cries, oh. While I sing Sarata, my heart palpitates so. Ah, let me take a little stroll. Let me take a little stroll. She comes to the hall of the 500 Lohan, which are known for their distinctive facial expressions. Ah, here are the Lohan. What a bunch of silly, amorous souls. Every one a bearded man. How each his eyes at me rolls. Look at the one hugging his knees. His lips are mumbling my name so, and the one with his cheek in his hand, as though thinking of me so. That one has a pair of dreamy eyes, dreaming dreams of me so. But the Lohan in sackcloth, what is he after? With his hellish, heathenish laughter, with his roaring, rollicking laughter, laughing at me so? Laughing at me, for when beauty is past and youth is lost, who will marry an old crone? When beauty is faded and youth is jaded, who will marry an old, shriveled cocoon? The one holding a dragon, he is cynical. The one riding a tiger, he looks quizzical. And that long-browed, handsome giant, he seems pitiful. For what will become of me when my beauty is gone? These candles of the altar, they are not for my bridal chamber. These long incense containers, they are not for my bridal parlor. And the straw prayer cushions, they cannot serve as quilt or cover. O God, whence comes this burning, suffocating ardor? Whence comes this strange, infernal, unearthly ardor? I'll tear these monkish robes, I'll bury the Buddhist sutras, I'll drown the wooden fish, and I'll leave all the monastic putras. I'll leave the drums, I'll leave the bells, and the chants, and the yells, and all the interminable, exasperating, religious chatter. I'll go downhill and find me a young and handsome lover. Let him scold me, beat me, kick or ill-treat me. I will not become a Buddha. I will not mumble Mita, Pranya, Para. This brings us to the topic of the actual service of the Buddhistic religion as an emotional outlet for the Chinese people. First, it makes the seclusion of women not so complete and more endurable. The desire of women to go to the temple, as against the lesser desire of men to do the same, is as much due to their emotional need for going outdoors as to the usual greater religiosity of women. The 1st and 15th days of a month and the festive occasions are days actually anticipated for weeks ahead by women in their secluded chambers. Secondly, its spring pilgrimages provide legitimate outlet for the very much atrophied Chinese wanderlust. These pilgrimages come in early spring and coincide with Easter. Those who cannot go far away at least may go to weep on the relatives' graves on Qingming Day, which has the same emotional basis. Those who can put on sandals or go in sit-down chairs to the famous temples. Some people in Amoy still persist in sailing about 500 miles on old sailing junks to the Putu Islands off the coast of Ningpo every spring. In the north, the annual pilgrimage to Miaofengshan is still a prevailing custom. Thousands of pilgrims, old and young, men and women, may be seen on the trail carrying sticks and yellow bags, traveling nights and days to the sacred temple. Among them, the spirit of jollity prevails as it did in Chaucer's time, and the tales are told on the way like those Chaucer recorded. Hence, thirdly, it provides the Chinese with a chance to enjoy mountain scenery, for most Buddhist temples are situated on high mountains at scenic spots. It is the one little pleasure the Chinese allow themselves in their usual humdrum everyday life. They arrive and put up in what seem to be superior hotel rooms, and drink tea and gossip with the monks. The monks are polite conversationalists. They offer good vegetarian dinners and reap an enormous sum in their coffers. The pilgrims then go home with freshened spirits and renewed energy for their exacting daily routine. Who can deny that Buddhism has an important place in the scheme of Chinese life?